everybody, this is Justin from Black Module Studio bringing you a new Unity Basics tutorial. Before we get started, I'd like to mention the Patreon campaign I started to help support the creation of these tutorial videos. If you enjoy these videos and would like to see them continue, please consider heading over to Patreon and pledging. Today I'll be covering prefabs in Unity. Prefab is a type of asset that is pre-configured in the scene view and stored in the project view. Prefabs are useful for times when you have a game object that you may need several instances of that are nearly identical or possibly even identical. Things such as rockets shot from a rocket launcher, for example, or even trees, like trees in your game, or maybe not trees, but like props or bushes. One reason why they're useful is because you instantiate instances of the prefab, and those instances are linked to that prefab. So when you change a value in a component on a prefab, all of the instances that are in your scene view receive those changes. So how do we create a prefab? Well, first off, we're going to need a game object, so let's just go ahead and create an empty game object. We'll just zero it out, and then we'll add a component to it. Let's go ahead and actually just add our example script to it, just so we have some here. So we have our example script that we created in the last video. What we can do is, what I like to do, I like to organize my prefabs into a folder that I call prefabs. All we have to do is grab that game object and drag it into our folder, and that's that. This is now a prefab. You can see right here it says game object.prefab. Assets and prefabs have this blue cube icon to represent them. So one thing to notice now is, it may be kind of hard to tell, but game object here, this is now blue instead of black, blue text. It's a little difficult to see sometimes. Also, when you click it, you have these new options here: prefabs, select, revert, and apply. So what we can do is, let's just go ahead and drag a couple of these in. So we have these three. What we can do is, if we uncheck my bool, when that is bolded, it means it's an override to what is in our actual prefab. So this one instance has a difference. So when I click on these other ones, it's still checked and it's not bold, but this one is. Now, because that is bolded, if I want my actual prefab to receive that change and then propagate it to these other two instances of the prefab, I can hit the apply button. It's no longer bold, and now all of my prefabs have that change. What we can also do is, if we make a change, so we check this, and it's different from our actual prefab object here. If we've made changes and we no longer want those changes, we can simply click the revert button. Now what this other button does up here, this select button, if we click it, it will actually select the prefab. So if I click it here, we can see now that my prefab is selected. It's highlighted the location and then the name. And then we have this right here. So it's easy to just make changes here. Like when I check this, I don't need to actually go and hit the apply button because I was in the actual prefab. So it can be useful to just, if you know you're going to make changes that you want to propagate across all of them, that's fine. That's how you do it. The thing to note is we see that in the transform, the position and the rotation are bolded. Now, even though they're bolded, they're changes from the original. These values are for this instance only. They don't apply to the base prefab. So when I hit apply, I'm going to hit it as many times as I want. It's not going to change all of these other instances. So it does change it in this base prefab, as you can see, where it's 0, 0 on everything, and then right here, negative 1.4, negative 0.6 on the X and the Y. When I apply this and I select my prefab, it does carry those over. But it does not change it on the instances. Now, how can we instantiate prefabs? I basically went over one simple way, just the drag and drop. We're creating instances of it here. But one thing we can do, let's go and delete all these. And now I will create an empty game object. This is going to hold, we'll call it prefab test. This is going to hold a script. I'm going to create a C# script. We'll call it prefab generator because it's going to generate prefabs for us. So the first thing we need to do is we need to have a reference to our prefab. Now prefab is a game object, so we'll say game object and we'll say my prefab. Let's actually make that public first. So we'll go and save that. I'm going to drag this onto our prefab, drag it onto our prefab test. And now what we need to do is drag our prefab into this slot or select it by clicking the circle. Oops. Alright, so now we have a reference to our prefab. If I go back into the script, what we can do now is on start we can what's called instantiate an instance of our prefab. So I'll say instantiate, and we need to pass in, it takes 3 parameters, we'll pass in our prefab, and then it needs a position, so we'll say transform, dot position, and then it needs a rotation, which is a quaternion, so we'll say quaternion, dot identity. Alright, there's no errors. So now, since that's in the start, it will create an instance of our prefab when I hit play. Alright, there we go. And you can see, when you create them in script, it automatically creates, or in the name it automatically puts clone within parentheses. That way you know it's an instance of that prefab. Well, that covers today's tutorial on prefabs in Unity. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe. Also check out my Patreon campaign and consider supporting. As always, thank you for watching.